Right, so what does all of this have to do with feathers? The idea of a white feather being synonymous with cowardice stretches back to at least the 18th century, supposedly from the sport of cockfighting, with the belief that cockerels sporting white feathers were poor fighters. Whether that's really how the notion got started or not, over time, a white feather came to be associated with weakness and cowardice in parts of Britain, notably appearing in the 1902 novel The Four Feathers and the 1907 novel The White Feather. This brings us to August of 1914, when Vice Admiral Charles Penrose Fitzgerald came up with an idea to bolster recruitment. At this point in the war, enlisting was voluntary. The idea was to have women present white feathers to any man on the streets who wasn't wearing a uniform. To help accomplish this goal, Fitzgerald recruited a group of 30 women to hand out the feathers to any man they saw out of uniform in his hometown of Folkestone. He dubbed this newly formed group the Order of the White Feather. When the British press got wind of the campaign and reported on it, many women across the country reacted in kind and similarly began handing out white feathers to any man they saw in civilian clothing. This campaign was inflamed by numerous forms of propaganda and rampant rumors about the rape of Belgium, graphically speaking of Germans brutally torturing Belgian women and children and implying the same would happen in Britain if the men of the country did not go to war. As one war poster stated, "Britain is fighting not only for freedom in Europe, but to defend your mothers, wives, and sisters from the horrors of war." In a propaganda poster directed at women, it stated, "To the young women of London, is your best boy wearing khaki? If not, don't you think he should be? If your young man neglects his duty to his king and country, the time may come when he will neglect you." These types of campaigns worked remarkably well. Journalist Alan Ball even went so far as to write in 1916, "A husband lying in a rough grave in France is easier to bear than a shirker by your side." In a similar note, in a July of 1915 edition of The Times, one Ethel M. penned a personal column noting, "Jack F.G., if you are not in khaki by the 20th, I shall cut you dead." As the Order of the White Feather grew, it was reported that gangs of young feather girls would go around handing feathers out to men on the streets. William Brooks noted of this in an interview he gave in 1993 about why he joined to fight in World War I. "Once war broke out, the situation at home became awful, because people did not like to see men or lads of army age walking about in civilian clothing or not in uniform of some sorts, especially in a military town like Woolwich. Women were the worst. They would come up to you in the street and give you a white feather or stick it in the lapel of your coat. A white feather is the sign of cowardice, so they meant you were a coward and that you should be in the army doing your bit for king and country." It got so bad, it wasn't safe to go out. So in 1915, at the age of 17, I volunteered under the Lord Derby scheme. Now that was a thing where once you applied to join, you were not called up at once, but were given a blue armband with a red crown to wear. This told people that you were waiting to be called up and kept you safe, or fairly safe, because if you were seen to be wearing it for too long, the abuse in the street would soon start again. James Lovegrove, who was 16 when he joined the war effort, wrote, "On my way to work one morning, a group of women surrounded me. They started shouting and yelling at me, calling me all sorts of names for not being a soldier. Do you know what they did? They struck a white feather in my coat, meaning I was a coward. Oh, I did feel dreadful, so ashamed. I went to the recruiting office. The sergeant there couldn't stop laughing at me, saying things like, 'Looking for your father, sonny, and come back next year when the war's over.' Well, I must have looked so crestfallen that he said, 'Let's check your measurements again.' You see, I was 5 foot 6 inches and only about 8.5 stone. This time he made me out to be about 6 feet tall and 12 stone, at least that is what he wrote down. All lies, of course, but I was in." In another